And so we move on to part 2, where I go to fight the boss. While this is not exactly my favourite boss, it's definitely one of my favourites, because like with Gascoigne and like with some of the later bosses, it is a hunter boss in inverted commas, in the sense that you're not fighting a big beast that takes up half the camera, you're fighting a hunter with generally the same abilities that you have. And here I was just pointing out the exterior area of the castle, or some extra bits. Some lovely lazy texturing, but you know, in a spot like that where many people aren't really going to be bothered looking, that's not too bad. And over on this left side you can actually see the area where we started at. There is the gate which opened up when we entered into this supposed courtyard area, and that over there was the shortcut, which looks like it was... I don't know, it looks like it was like tacked on or something. It's not like built into the walls or anything, which I found kind of odd when I actually went and looked at it, but whatever. So that's where that is, and it's nice you can see that from there. But about the boss, he's essentially like he's like, I imagine, what they wanted Arcane hunters to be like, in the sense of using a lot of hunter tools in the mix of or spells I should say, in the mix of melee combat. Which should give you an indication of what the fight's going to be a bit like. It's one that can give people quite a lot of trouble, but it's and while it is definitely difficult, and I do enjoy it for that, it's not really insurmountable or as annoying as, say, something like Parl's AoE. Like fights like Dark Beast Parl or the Bloodletting Beast, where like the camera is just like obscured by their massive bodies and they have really dodgy hitboxes. Those are fights I would say are a tad bullshit, but this kind of boss, this is the one I appreciate. So you have this big area, you have the chair in the middle with a figure inside, and it opens up to one of my a really damn good cutscene for a starting boss, which gives you an indication of just like what he's been through over the centuries, and then now that he's got a purpose to rise up again, what he's going to be like now. This, of course, is Mars Ligarius, or Ligarius, depending on the pronunciation. And this is what's left of him, and he is certainly not happy to see us. The first phase is basically just a matter of avoiding his magic attacks, closing in and doing damage, and avoiding his punishes, like this one. Which, once you get used to the timing and dodging to the side, are not too bad. Generally when you close in, he will do something like that and back off, which can be a bit of an issue if you get him around near the edges, because of course he can't fall off the edge of the map, but you can. So it can be, you can have the unfortunate situation where you've got him up against the ledge and then he blasts you off. So you have to be a bit careful about that. And watch out for that combo, because that hits me all the damn time in these subsequent fights. And yeah, I don't want around this boss, by the way. that no death streak ends with Ligarius. But I put all of them in because, from what I've seen of a lot of comments on Souls LPs or Bloodborne LPs, that people like to see failures as much as successes. Like, it wasn't a ridiculous amount where I was just getting blasted one shot by an AoE over and over again, but it was a fair amount. He put up a good fight. And this is his phase 2, and this changes dramatically in that he is far more content to just rush you down and just really close in with that sword of his, as you can see. dodging back, not the best idea when he does that. But, normally the transition from one phase to the other is marked by him trying to power up, which he does in this fight as well, and you can punish it very easily with a backstab, but if you don't, he actually gets an ability to deflect bullets. So if you're like a Blood Tinge build relying on something like the Evelyn, you're gonna want to be careful about that. I mean, at the end of the day, I think you can still parry him in that phase, but I've generally not given him the chance to do that, because I've just always backstabbed him. It's sort of an issue that will only come up for somebody doing like a gun-only or a bow-only run. And be careful when he does that move, because he can do it up close and it tracks slightly, so you can have a situation where you're trying to close in and do damage, and you're being stopped by his magic aura. Unfortunate. But as long as you do this, you can consistently chip away at his damage. It's not too big a deal. Phase 1, if you get hit a lot, it's not that big a deal because you can back off and heal will very rarely chase you down. But you do want to avoid a situation like this where he's backed up against a place you can't really get him out of, because he will always try to back away from you, and abilities like this will do a lot of damage to you, and he will just spam magic. So what you do in that situation is turn away from where you want him to not be, so that he'll back off back into like the center of the boss room. And this is the charge that I talked about. Very easily interrupted, but if you don't interrupt it, you're in for a world of hurt. And then he has this bizarre jump, which actually helps to factor in to dealing with him. I've mentioned this before when I was fighting Clerics, but I don't really like bosses that sort of jump up into the air where you can't really see them, and then just drop down from seemingly anywhere on the map. With Lugaris it's not too bad, because you'll see later on in the next fight, I think, that you can actually see where he's going. If you unlock and look up, you have enough room to see, like, oh, he's over there. And it becomes a lot easier then to not only dodge the jump he does, or the drop down attack, but punish him for it, which you'll see me do an awful lot. But still, in the second phase, it becomes a lot harder to get health back, because he will chase you down very quickly. Other than that, there really isn't that much to say about the fight. His tracking with the scythe is very, very good. Less so with his sword, but again, you don't want to back off when he's using the sword, because he can very easily just lunge at you. And that's intentionally designed to get you dashing away. And yes, you can visceral attack him an awful lot, and that's a very good idea, especially if you have a skill build. I don't think I've mentioned this before, but visceral attacks, from what I've seen, are affected by your level, your skill stat, of course the Clawmark rune, your gems, not your weapon damage. And I'm not sure if there's anything else. No, I think that's about it. When he does that stab down as well with his sword, you can shoot that, or you can whack it with a melee attack. But what that does is that it fires off sort of like daggers and such into the air that will track you and attack you while Lugaris is also attacking you. So it's generally a good idea to get rid of that as soon as you see it. But that is about it in terms of what Lugaris' fight is like. I suppose I can talk a bit more about why he's here, but that'll come more into play after I've beaten him, and this is the last attempt. But it does have to do with that crown that he's currently wearing. I mentioned a lot about the crowns and the statues in Canehurst and how they are linked to there's something unique to Canehurst, and I'll talk a bit about why once we actually have a look at it. But other than that, I'll just let you enjoy the fight for now, because there isn't much more to say. And there we have it. He got really gung-ho with those leaps up into the air, didn't he? But as I demonstrated there, it's very easy to punish those with backstabs once you know how to deal with them. And of course, you get the Crown of Illusions for defeating him. One of the precious secrets of Canehurst. This is the indication that you have to wear this to basically find a secret area in Canehurst that explains what Mardigligarius is actually doing here, and why he's stuck around and why he's so adamant to kill you. He's hiding a secret that he doesn't want the rest of the world to know, especially not an upstart hunter that might cause some trouble. So, what was the big secret? The final area of Canehurst Castle. The Grand Throne Room, as I like to think of it as. Because that's basically what it is. And a little something extra inside.
Visitor, I claim no subjects, but here lieth our throne. Kneel afore us, or get thee gone.
So yes, there is one last vile blood left in this place. Not just any vile blood. The ruler of the vile bloods. Which does beg the question, why the hell is she still alive if Ligarius has actually been here all this time and is the sworn enemy of the vile bloods? Well, we'll find out. Very, very shortly. But first I wanted to point out again the statues with the crowns on. I genuinely do think with these statues, they're an indication that the Crown of Illusion, as it were, is not something terribly unique, but it's something that a lot of Canehurst nobles actually had, so that they could access all areas of Canehurst and restrict access to Canehurst to lower servants, who would otherwise either need invitations or guests would need invitations, but without the crown you can't access everywhere. And this is the unopened summons, very important if you want the Radiant's Executioner Oath rune. Which is why I'm picking it up. First, let's actually see what Queen Annalise is actually like.
Such impudence. Defiled are we, yet still queen. We shall not give audience to an ill-mannered beast.
Quite arrogant indeed. But there remains the question, why is she still alive? She has this big mask on her, so clearly she... the implication is that Ligarius clamped this on her for some reason. I don't know quite what the effect would have been, but in short, not very nice.
How sad this is. If only our life was so easily forfeit.
And that's why she's still around. She actually cannot die, for she is the undead queen.
We shall not give audience to an ill-mannered beast. Get thee gone.
And so Ligarius was keeping a secret so that no of the Varbloods could join. Speaking of which...
Art thou brave, or merely lacking in wit? It matters not. Our flesh is undying. Speak thy mind.
I was umming and erring as to whether to do that, and it ended up being kind of funny, so I did it. I'm glad I did.
An odd hunter thou art indeed. We've tired of these piteous nights. Share in our plight, and take oath against the church. If thou wouldst this path walk, I prithee, partake of my rotted blood.
If you're worried about this affecting your ability to join other covenants, don't worry, it honestly makes no difference.
Very well. Drink deep of our blood. Feel the spreading corruption burn. Now, thou art too a vile blood. We two, the very last on this earth.
Not actually that true. There are quite a few others.
We await thy return, for the honor of Canehurst.
Alright then. So what's left to do with the unopened summons? Well, let's go and revisit Alfred, shall we? But after this. There's nothing really that interesting on the Corruption Room in terms of detail, but it does emphasize this is meant to be the pseudo-Dark Wraith Covenant. It doesn't really work quite like that in practice. Any Covenant can use the Sinister Bell. It's just that the Vile Blood one rewards you most for it. And this is the Canehurst badge. This gives you access to Numbing Mist in the Insight shop, which is not too shabby. Some very good armor in terms of physical defense, and the only blood-tinged trick weapon, in inverted commas, in the main game. Certainly not my favourite. I'm a big fan of the Bloodletter, but the Chikage, as it's called, is still fairly decent. In fact, it's more than decent. It's genuinely very good. And I go back to the Hunter's Dream to demonstrate it here. It works very differently to any other weapon. It's kind of like the Ligarius Wheel in terms of the transform state alters the damage and changes the moveset slightly. But unlike the Ligarius Wheel, it completely changes the damage. It stops being physical damage and starts being blood damage. And this is what it is. It's like the magic sword Makoto from Demon Souls, where your health constantly ticks while you have it active. So, that's that, and that's how you get the blood-tinged weapon. I added a little interlude before going to actually talk to Alfred, because I currently have 17 insight in this section here, which means that some things around Yana begin to change. And oh yes, we have a tiny amygdala just hanging around on Eden Chapel. I wonder if he's been there all the time. I wouldn't know. Maybe someone with 40 insight should go and look at the start of the game and see if it's there. So, but having your insight over 15, it doesn't really change all that much, but it does have a few alterations that are worth noting. First off, in Hemwick Charnel Lane, it adds those summonable creatures in the Witches of Hemwick boss fight. They start appearing everywhere around Hemwick Charnel Lane, more or less. But it also affects the church guys here. For instance, this guy's lantern now actually has a magic projectile that homes in. It's very annoying, actually. But yeah, if you have 15 insight early on in the game, you will start to see that, and it will start to be active, which is what I find very weird. Like, the whole idea with the insight is that you're seeing things that were originally unseen and such, and now you realise it's there, it's now effective. Which I don't get. It's like saying you can't be, like, shot by a sniper because you didn't know the sniper was there. It makes no sense, but in any case, that's how insight can affect enemy difficulty. Again, it's fairly menial. They don't do a terrible lot with it, but it's there, and I figured I'd show it off. But Alfred is still hanging around near the entrance to Forbidden Woods. He hasn't really gone anywhere else, because he hasn't really had much reason to go anywhere else. Again, like with Eileen and a lot of other NPCs, and there was some interesting pop in there, wasn't there? His quest line doesn't really go many places. It's fairly shallow. I was just doing this to be a tease. Thankfully, he doesn't recognize it as a vile blood gesture.
Oh, good to see you safe. Now, let's think up something to discuss. Just tell me what piques your interest.
This is how you end up getting the Executioner's Rune. Which I think I mentioned before, yeah.
Aha! Is that the sigil of Canehurst? I've heard tell of Canehurst nobles and their amusingly pompous invitations. Wonderful. I thank you profusely. I will depart immediately, but first, a token of my gratitude. Ah, feel my master's hand at work. Praise the good blood, and let us cleanse these tarnished streets.
That's a very decent badge for strength builds.
It has been an honor, but I must say goodbye. Let us cleanse these tarnished streets, and may the good blood guide your way.
And it's a good badge for strength builds because it gives you access to the Ligarius Wheel, which in the main game is the only S-scaling strength weapon. It's very good. I'm more of a fan of the Kirkhammer myself, but I still have a lot of love for this weird, berserk-esque kind of weapon, which is sort of like a Catherine wheel on Arcane steroids. If that gives you any indication, you'll see soon enough how it works, and if you know how Alfred's questline can go, that should give you an indication of what I'm going to do. But it's weird that you can only really get into Canehurst either with the Crown of Illusions sort of thing, or with an invitation, because it does make me wonder how the Executioners got there in the first place. Because they either must have had an invitation, or, like, somebody with a crown ended up getting in there. Maybe Ligarius. Which is interesting because, again, it adds more connections between the Vilebloods and the Executioners other than just them stabbing each other. Which is perhaps the reason why somebody who has the vile blood can still be an Executioner. It's very interesting, but you don't really hear much about it in this. So, what is Alfred going to do?
Master, look! I've done it! I've done it! I've smashed and pounded and grounded this rotten siren into fleshy pink pulp. There, you filthy monstrosity! What good's your immortality now? Try stirring up trouble in this sorry state. All mangled and twisted, with every inside on the outside for all the world to see.
Wow, Alfred, just chewing the scenery right there, aren't you? So yeah, not much left of Queen Annalise. Yeah, she's technically alive, but, well, it's still not looking too great. If you're worried about this being the end of your beloved Vileblood Queen, don't worry, there's another way to restore her. The Vilebloods always win. But that won't be for some time anyway. But yeah, that's Alfred's inventive solution for getting rid of the Vilebloods. Now, props to him, I suppose. Even though he's completely flipped his lid. If it wasn't already much of an indication already with his dialogue, Alfred is a fucking fanatic. He is completely nuts about the Executioners.
You, is it? Look at this. Thanks to you, I've done it. Well, isn't it wonderful? Now Master can be canonized as a true martyr. I've done it. I have.
I do wonder who he thinks is going to do the canonization, because there frankly aren't many church hunters around, and in fact he's pretty much the only executioner around. So again, that points to a lot to Alfred's sort of delusion as a character. He's very much sort of completely flipped his lip at first. The best gesture in the game. With an outstanding voice. Alfred's questline from this point on can go different ways. The normal way is that you leave this area and he ends up where you first met him, having committed suicide. It's not explained how, but he just did. For some reason, and that's the end of it. I honestly think that's a lame-ass ending, so I'm going to do a different one. I'm going to see what happens if you actually decide to attack Alfred here, because not many people do it. And it's a shame because there's some interesting dialogue he has if you do. So, adios.
Just what is the meaning of this? Why, Turner, you're jealous, aren't you?
It's interesting that he thinks we're jealous. Like, of all the reasons for attacking him, for him it's either we're mad, like blood drunk, or we're jealous of what he's done to canonize Ligarius and defeat the Vile Bloods. Like, that's the only reasons for him. It's like, we're not after blood dregs, we're not secretly a Vile Blood or anything. He's so completely out of it that he just can't fathom anyone really wanting to kill him at this point, other than like jealousy or something, because he's so completely fucking stoked about basically fulfilling his life purpose and canonizing his master senpai. Which again, it points out to why Alfred is this crazy, deluded man. He's just been so radicalized by this crazy sect that he just can't think of any other life beyond just executioners via Vile Bloods and church reputation.
Is an awful thing. You must find your own way on this hunt, as I have mine.
And that dialogue there for me really sells it, where it says you must find your own way as I have mine. It's very has a very final, a sort of a final sense of it, like he's done. His purpose has been fulfilled. He couldn't be happier. Which probably explains why he decides to off himself later, because it's like, well, that's it, I'm done. My life purpose is fulfilled, I have nothing else to live for, because there's no other executioners and there's no other Vile Bloods. Which is a bit sad, perhaps, but still, you don't get a lot of that impression unless you look into it, because he doesn't get as much dialogue or screen time as somebody like Soler or Sigmar, where you see a gradual development in their character. It is all very sudden. Which really is a shame. I mentioned before about how there was allegedly some sort of negotiation and executive meddling where shareholders wanted certain characters to die. Apparently an awful lot of them. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the development that was meant to go into these characters was cut short by executive meddling, and here is the Radiance rune. It's again, most of the overrunes are pretty terrible, but if you're gonna get any that isn't the Hunter of Hunters rune, the Executioner's rune is generally alright. It slightly increases your file recovery, but that's generally about it. And again, even if you're a Vile Blood, you can be an Executioner, and vice versa. It is really, it's more of a gameplay convenience, so you can swip and swatch between, as Dark Souls 3 gives an indication. But it does make me wonder whether, because there is another character later on who is a Vile Blood but is also a church member, that makes me wonder whether there was a lot more interaction between the two than we initially suggest. They weren't just mortal enemies. But again, you don't get too much of that. Only guesswork. Pretty standard, but still pretty disappointing. Which generally is the reason why a lot of people who play Bloodborne after playing Dark Souls 1 are very disappointed in its NPCs and its world, because it feels a lot shallower. I mean, there's still stuff to find there, it's still quite interesting, I would say, but I would definitely agree, it's not as fleshed out as it could be. There's a lot of promise, but it's not really developed on, but from this point on it will probably be live comp, so I will see you next time.